Welcome to the Comedy Film Funnel. This is episode number 11, and the movie we'll be looking at this episode is 1980's Airplane. My name is Susan Tekla Kruglenska. That's the feminine of Kruglenski. It actually means I'm married to someone named Kruglenski, but I'm not. I wish I had such a punchy name as my co-host. What's your name again?
That's true. My entire name is only 8 letters. My entire name. I'm Joe Dater, which is Apache for he who has wide feet. And I am very, very horny for the female inflatable pilot. Really. I'm just saying, if they sold that commercially, I'd buy one.
Yeah, so Otto, I never got that joke till today, that his name is Otto because he's the autopilot. I never got
Really?
So yeah, this is like we gotta do Airplane. How can we not do Airplane? My gosh, how can we not do Airplane?
No,
and bonus, there's a lot of there's actually a fair amount of controversy in it. Like there's some jokes that we're definitely gonna have to be like,
I'm shocked by that.
But it's it is just a funny movie, and that's all there is to it. There's no way of getting around it. We're recording this in the middle of the summer. I have no fans on, so you won't have any sound interference. But I mean, as you can probably already see, a sweat ball. I'm already a sweat ball. I'm in a very hot apartment. I was going to wear something like a Girl Scout uniform because I wanted to cosplay one of the Girl Scouts, but it was too hot. It was like canvas material. I was like, no, I can't do it. So I'm just doing like, a man's shirt. Like there's just a million like men's button-down shirts throughout the movie. But the bonus is just, you have to take my word for it. I am also wearing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's basketball shorts, but that's just
you can't see from the waist down. You're wearing your Lakers gear.
But that's happening. So that's what I'm cosplaying. Part of that.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Okay, so Airplane, Joe.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your stewardess speaking. We regret any inconvenience the sudden cabin movement might have caused. By the way, is there anyone on board who knows how to fly a plane?
All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the, a little bit of background on the movie Airplane ! We're going to then talk about the movie for a little while, and then we're going to interrupt ourselves at some point that seems to make sense, and we're going to talk about Zaz, Z-A-Z, Zaz, the people who put this movie together. And their history. We're going to go off on a little tangent there and talk about some of the movies that kind of led up to all of this. And then we're going to go back and talk about the rest of the movie. So if you want to skip, you will see the chapter listings in in the description box as usual. I always take care of that for you. That will all be there.
And there's one word I want to throw out at the beginning. I want to throw this out as a defining word that I think I associate with this movie, that you should associate with this movie. And I think you know the word I'm about to say. Care to take a guess?
It's not parody. There's no way you're going to say parody. Sketch. Boobs? I don't know.
Buttons.
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 Boobs is close, yeah.
I'll explain later.
Let's just get going. So this was a sleeper that nobody expected it really, and it just, on sheer force of funniness, it became a absolute smash hit. It was a $3.5 million budget, and in its first week, it made $85 million, which in 1980 numbers is pretty...
That's insane, yeah.
Impressive. 3 weeks later, Caddyshack came out, and so it was competing with that. They both did great. They did fine. They were fine competing with each other, but it's interesting that three weeks later, Caddyshack came out, which is a different kind of movie.
1980 was one hell of a year for movies.
A hell of a year.
It was amazing, right? You have a movie I think you've heard of called The Shining.
Yeah, The Shining, that's of course.
Caddyshack, The Blues Brothers, a movie I think you've also heard of. One of the best science fiction films of all time, Robert Altman's Popeye, came out in 1980. And of course, in May 25th, the movie that everyone was anticipating, every kid lined up for, couldn't wait to see. I was lined up. I camped out overnight for it. I was so excited I couldn't wait. The Gong Show movie opened.
What pushed this man over the edge? His new movie, The Gong Show movie.
Yeah, and also The Empire Strikes Back, but I don't really remember.
And The
that.
Empire Strikes Back. But I thought the way we'd kick this off, before we even talk about background on the movie, is it would be kind of fun to just, each of us, do a little top 5 favorite airplane jokes. Because this movie is 100% about the jokes. Like,
It is.
there are very few movies that are as wall-to-wall chock full of jokes as Airplane. Like, what else are you even going to think of except what are your favorite jokes?
Well, I have a list.
So we're going to talk about that,
I do.
and then
I have my list ready.
yeah, and there's probably going to be a little overlap.
Well, we'll see. I think there won't be, actually. I'm surprised.
We actually do have, relatively different senses of humor. So we can then dissect those jokes and talk about why they're funny, and it'll take us partway through the movie anyway.
I'll start with my number 5 is everything involving Johnny.
Yes.
Steven Stucker,
Yep.
Johnny, every single thing, every single moment he's on screen, every single dumb thing he says, everything about him is perfect.
What kind of plane is it?
Oh, it's a big, pretty white plane with red stripes and curtains in the window and wheels, and it looks like a big Tylenol.
Bad news. The fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
Johnny, what can you make out of this?
This? Well, I could make a cap, or a brooch, a pterodactyl. Ariel, look for Henry Turtle! It's a twister! It's a twister!
Everything about him I love. And one of the things I love about him is there's no logic, even if you know about, like, the rules of comedy, he defies all the rules. There's no reason why that wacky guy showing up in this movie should work so well.
Yes.
It almost would seem like somebody said, well, this movie, it's kind of deadpan. The jokes are going to fly over people's heads. Why don't we hire a really wacky guy to just say wacky things? And conventional wisdom would say, well, that's not going to work. That's going to be ridiculous and silly, and yet it completely works. I have no idea why it's funny. And this movie is full of things where even watching comedy for my whole life and thinking about it and analyzing why things are funny, I still watch the movie and go, I don't know why that's funny, but it just is. It's so full of things like that. And one of them is Johnny. He's introduced late in the movie, and he's just in the background being funny. Not funny in a way that Robert Stack and Leslie Nielsen are being funny, or Lloyd Bridges in this kind of very serious deadpan way. He's just jumping around being nutty and saying silly things, and he seems to be the only one in the movie who knows it's a comedy.
Well, what's funny is he even does a joke that makes absolutely no sense. There's one point where he says,
A few of them.
I mean, a lot of them don't really make sense, but the one that really, really, really doesn't make sense is he says,
Me, John, big tree.
Me, John, big tree.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's a reference
So
to or
that-
something. It was probably a thing that Steven Stucker improvised. I don't know what he was
I know
referring
what it
to.
is. I know what it is. So when
What
they
is it?
had it, yes, they had a comedy troupe. So we're going to get into their history. Steven Stucker was in their original comedy group, Kentucky Fried Theater, and that was from a skit he did. It's just a line from a skit he did. It is just like only if you went to see their shows in Wisconsin or for the short time they were in LA
Wow.
performing, would you even understand that? It is just completely,
I just thought it was a reference to something a baby boomer would know, something from like Davy Crockett or something like that, something from the 50s, because these were all, guys of that generation who grew up watching TV in the 50s. That's why, they make reference to Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
So I just assumed it's like he's referencing Lassie or something like that, or
Yeah.
when he's referencing, there's a fire in the barn, that it was that kind of a thing.
So I'm going to have as number 5.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking.
And etc. Yeah, I think that's pretty brilliant. I love that it's a running gag that just gets better and better. And you think by the time he gets to amphetamines, they're not going to top it. And then the glue is just. I think it's kind of dumb when he's hanging upside down, but it's still. I love that they went all the way to glue. I love that.
What it kind of reminds me of in a little way is the kids in the hall. Horse tranquilizers? It's like, how do you escalate drugs? What do you escalate it to? And the kids in the hall escalated it to horse tranquilizers. Zaz escalated it to sniffing glue.
Yeah. Well, 1980, 70s were sniffing glue time. People were really doing that. It was a real thing. So
Well,
that was.
it reflects their generation.
Yeah,
They're
it
from like the
reflects the
60s
times, for
when,
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, Lloyd Bridges just always, every time he reads it perfectly, he does it perfectly. It's just a great dry joke. Part of it is just that it's a beautiful parody line. It's a line straight out of a disaster movie.
It's one of the many lines that are in Airplane that are taken verbatim from Zero Hour.
Yes.
Which is, as most people know, probably anyone watching this already knows, that Airplane was a literal remake of a serious 1957 adventure movie called Zero Hour, and large chunks of dialogue are taken directly out of it verbatim.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
And some of them are, for some weird reason, funny in Airplane, even though it's the same exact dialogue in 0 Hour, and it's not funny in 0 Hour, and I still can't quite explain why. When they do the exact same line in Airplane, it's funny. Actually, I can kind of explain why in some cases.
Some of it they punched up like they did here. Obviously, they punched it up. They took it and ran with it, and they do that a few times. They insert extra words. They just do, little twists on the. But yeah, at some points they do it just. It's
but
just
I'm fascinated
straight.
by the ones where they changed nothing.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the ones where they changed nothing, and it becomes funny.
Yeah.
Number 4. Number 4 is Pinch Me.
I was captivated, entranced. It hit me like a thunderbolt. I had to ask the guy next to me to pinch me to make sure I wasn't dreaming.
It's the most perfectly played, deadpan, straight man reaction. The actor should get an Oscar for that slow burn of, like, looking and moving slowly away. Just the way he does it, it's slow, it's drawn out, and it's funny every single time I've seen it. I've never watched that scene without laughing at that moment.
It's kind of a gay joke. You could say, oh, is that a homophobic joke? But, nobody wants anybody to actually pinch them. You know what I mean? Like, nobody would be comfortable with that.
Is there anyone who you wouldn't think this is a weirdo?
Yeah.
If a stranger asks you to pinch them, they're a weirdo. It doesn't really matter.
Right. So it really doesn't matter. It's really not. It's not, anything.
Exactly.
But it's just cute. It's very cute, I think.
But it's 1980, and this is like meant to be a tough bar.
Yeah.
And
right, exactly.
So, the fact that the guy moves away from him is probably pretty progressive way to do that joke, because another way would have been for the guy to punch him.
Yeah, right. Then it would have been a homophobic joke, yeah.
Right, then it would have been a homophobic joke.
Yeah.
And it's not. The guy just sort of like, says, I think I'm just gonna sit over here.
No thanks.
Yeah, it's no thank you. That's right.
My number 4 joke is when the woman is not feeling well and Leslie Nielsen, the doctor, comes over and starts examining her. And as he's examining her, he starts taking eggs out of her mouth. And he's doing this magic trick where he's taking egg after egg after egg. And the last one...
You can see him palming the egg.
It's very obvious that
he's palming the egg,
he's palming the egg.
He's like doing this old school sleight of hand you'd learn out of a magic book.
Cocktail lounge magic. And then the last one he breaks and a bird flies out. Now, that's a joke I don't quite understand why it's funny, but it's so funny.
No.
And it's an abstract. You know what I mean? Like, they just kind of... There's something about placing that there that it works. It just feels like it kind of fits there, even though it doesn't. It's a very oddball joke. It's one of the oddest jokes, aside from Steven Stucker's jokes, one of the oddest jokes in the movie. And I just love it. It's so funny.
My number 3 favorite joke is the guy in the taxi.
Yes.
The guy in the taxi is played so brilliantly. And the number of times they call back to him still sitting in the cab waiting in the movie, I think it's 2 or 3 times during the movie that they call back to him still sitting in the taxi waiting. One, when Stryker is about to get on the plane, and another when Stryker is brought into the cockpit and decides he's going to sit down and he's going to try to land the plane. They cut back again there to the taxi, and I think at that point the fare is like $1,100. You see the ticking fare. It's so beautiful. And then if you stay to the end credits, he shows up again after the end credits, which a lot of people probably missed in 1980, because those were the days when there wasn't, a post-credit scene. Weirdly enough, I don't know if people can relate to this, but there was no Marvel Cinematic Universe in 1980. Yeah. It's hard to imagine. The Marvel Universe was all on television, and it was in the form of one show, and that was The Incredible Hulk, which in one episode featured Thor. That was the closest we got to the Avengers in 1980. So the guy in the taxi shows up at the end credits. You had to sit through all the end credits. It was a little extra joke. It was a little Easter egg, but it's perfect. And that they instinctively knew when to cut back to him. That those 2 instances where they cut back to him in the movie are perfectly timed. They're perfectly placed in the sequence of the movie.
It's about 50 minutes into the movie. They're doing that joke where he's looking at all the controls in front of him. And it goes on and on and on in this impossible way. And then it cuts to that guy. And it's great because you got lulled into this thing where, it's very funny that they're showing you all of these controls that don't stop. And then, but also it gives your brain a little bit of a break. and then they cut back.
It's exactly the right moment for you to be so involved.
All right, number 3. So it's when flight attendant Lorna Patterson is starting to get really upset that this plane is not doing well.
Randy, are you all right?
Oh, Dr. Rumack, I'm scared. I've never been so scared. And besides, I'm 26 and I'm not married.
We're going to make it. You've got to believe that.
Dr. Rumack, do you have any idea when we'll be landing?
Pretty soon. How you bearing up?
Well, to be honest, I've never been so scared. But at least I have a husband.
Just the cruelty of it, just the absolute cruelty.
It's just the cruelty of the second cup coffee woman, that she would happen to have said something so ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that was the thing she focused on.
Right. It's a little bit sexist. It's very sexist, actually. So I guess what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing that sometimes sexist jokes are funny.
I mean, you'd never see in a modern movie a woman saying, "I'm 26 and I never got married."
No, but back then you would, you know?
Right, yeah, in that era. And plus, this movie was hearkening back to an earlier era in a lot of ways, you know. So it almost effectively takes place in the 50s.
Yeah,
you know?
that's the thing is it's showing the cliche. You know, obviously this movie is nothing but cliche. So the cliche is you're 26, you're a young woman who's just dying to get married. And that harkens also back to 0 Hour, where they have a flight attendant who's got a boyfriend on board. This is kind of their siphoning that whole little storyline that they didn't use about the flight attendant on 0 Hour who has a boyfriend who she says to the pilots, "Oh, I'm gonna marry this guy if I have to drag him kicking and screaming across the finish line."
How you and that boyfriend of yours doing back there? You think you'll ever get him to the altar?
I'll get him there if I have to drag him every inch of the way.
She's going to drag him kicking and screaming into marriage. And, which again, everybody chuckles. It's really funny. It's really cute. That's what women would say. Like back then, you might say something like that.
It's very 1957.
Yeah. So they're taking that and they're kind of updating it. I think it's really cute. I mean, I know it's sort of weird for me to say that, but I love that joke.
My number 2 favorite gag, off-screen spit take.
Yes, I love that spit take.
Because of my mistake, 6 men didn't return from that raid.
7, Lieutenant Zip died this morning.
Now, again, their comedy instincts are amazing. It's one thing to show a spit take, always funny. Danny Thomas doing a spit take, always funny. It's great. But to show just the reaction to it and the water and not show the spit take
and her wincing
makes it even funnier. And yeah, Julie Haggerty just kind of doing her own take against the spit take. It's brilliant. It's just brilliantly done. And I laugh every time, and it's because it's an off-screen spit take.
Yeah. And Julie Haggerty's joke is so funny.
George Zip died this morning, and you just see the water arcing across the screen in front of her face is 10 times funnier than if you showed the spit take. And showing the spit take would have been funny. The water arcing in front of her face, 10 times funnier. And again, just the instincts.
And the other thing that makes this joke work is her voice is so important in this movie. Like, I think her voice, like, they cast her so well. Her having this little, very lilting, but deadpan delivery, that little voice. It's just, there's something about it. It's so funny. She's
so good.
And
she's so sweet and positive throughout the whole thing. Yeah, the casting is amazing.
All right, number 2. Am I on number 2? Yeah, I think I'm on number 2. Is when the plane is skidding into the runway and the people are running from gate to gate to gate. They're running from gate to gate to gate.
That's a great gag. When the announcer keeps updating.
And the announcer and exactly, that's part of it, is the announcer continually updating which gate it is. And, of course, it's a little bit of evokes like what it's really like to be in an era, dealing with them changing constantly the gates and all that stuff. It's making fun of the fact that you often do have to deal with that kind of stuff. And just the absurdity of everybody just running gate to gate to gate. And just the pure physicality of it. I love big physical jokes like that. It just takes over the screen, and it's stampeding and all that stuff. I love it.
Okay, so before I get to number 1, honorable mention is the folk song Sick Child scene.
There is only one river.
Which I love because basically you have an entire audience full of people in a theater in 1980 laughing at a dying child. And that's comedy, man. And it reminds me...
And Lorna Patterson's performance.
So
oh my
good.
God.
Yes, completely oblivious. Yeah, she's so into her song, she doesn't notice anything happening. The only reason that this didn't get on my main list is because it's somewhat marred by Jill Whalen mugging. Jill Whalen's mugging is out of place. It's out of place in the way you would think Johnny wouldn't work because it's so outwardly funny and wacky, but it really doesn't work. She was weirdly, I know this is going to sound surprising, not a great actor.
Well, they hired her for making that fish face. They asked her to make that fish face. Like that
Really?
that was a directive that they asked in test screenings for all the kids to make that exact face. So he wanted that exact face, and he liked the way she did it. So you can't really blame her.
All right,
you gotta blame.
You're right.
Blame the Zaz. Blame the Zaz.
I can't blame Julie Stubing or whatever her name was. She's the captain's daughter from Love Boat. I can't blame her for it, but it doesn't work for me. So other than that, but I love the whole setup of let's have this child be in peril and let's have it be funny and let's trick an audience into laughing at something horrifying.
The best lead-up joke that gets you into that mindset even more is when all the people in the cabin are like leaning to look and then smiling, and everybody's smiling at each other. That's like so beautifully done.
That,
they
heartwarming,
did that
sweet,
so perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then everybody in the crew looks at each other, and it's just too funny. It's so funny.
It's brilliant, but it reminds me of the W.C. Fields movie. You know, somebody bet him and said, "I bet you can't make audiences laugh at a blind man." And so he had the blind man come into a store, waving his cane around and knocking all of the bottles off of the shelves and all of the jars off the shelves and breaking everything in the store. And he knew that, okay, what you do is you make the blind man a threat, and the audience now, their sympathy goes towards W.C. Fields, who's the owner of the store, and getting all of his stuff wrecked. It's a way of shifting the sympathy so that you get an audience laughing at something that isn't funny at all, you know. And it reminds me of that. It's brilliant. And are you ready now? My number one favorite gag in the entire movie.
For God's sake, it's 90 degrees in here. Tell me what your number one joke is.
You can't.
Immediately.
There's no way you'll anticipate what this is. It's the tribal newscaster who is giving the story in the montage of TV news reports about the plane. He is giving the story by...
I know exactly what you're going to say. I know exactly what you're going to say.
And then he changes cameras. He switches to the other camera. That's
I love
the best. That's my favorite gag in the movie. It's so indicative of the brilliance of this movie. The whole scene is funny. It's all of these newscasters giving their version of, and you see a sort of standard American newscaster, and then you see a newscaster in Japan, and now the picture of the plane on the back is in the form of a Japanese print, which is very funny. And then finally, the comedy rule of threes, the third one is this guy in sort of tribal wear who looks like he could be a Maori or something. It's non-specific, some non-specific indigenous people. And he's doing that. And that is funny. And they could have just left it there. That could have been the punchline, right? But then he switches cameras. And that's the punchline on top of the punchline. And that's called the button. And this movie is full of buttons. Brilliant, brilliant buttons, where the Zaz instinct is you tell the joke, there's a punchline, but before you cut away from the punchline, there's one more thing. There's a button on it. And there's so many of those in this movie that just work so well, where the punchline's already there, the joke is already there, but then there's a joke on top of the joke.
My number one joke is pretty much the first joke in the movie. My number one joke is the two announcers, the people who are announcing.
The white zone, red zone.
The white zone, red zone.
The white zone is for immediate loading and unloading of passengers only. There is no stopping in the red zone.
The white zone is for immediate loading and unloading of passengers only. There is no stopping in the red zone.
Those were real announcers. Those were the actual announcers. Just people who were announcing at airports. They hired people who actually did the announcement at airports. Just like Stanley Kubrick hired someone who really did talk to the astronauts as they're in flight, as they're in space. The person who actually was the communications person, Stanley Kubrick broke contract with the union and made sure he hired someone who actually knew how to talk authentically.
X-ray Delta One, this is Mission Control. Roger, you're 2013. Sorry you fellas are having a bit of trouble. We are reviewing telemetric information in our mission simulator and will advise.
And I think it's so funny that they did the same thing. They were like, no, we want them to really sound like the kind of people who would talk into an intercom at an airport. So those are those two people. So then they introduce a few more world building, people arriving at the airport, more scenes of people arriving at the airport, the Hare Krishnas attacking people, all that stuff. And then they bring them in again a second time.
The red zone has always been for loading and unloading. There's never stopping in a white zone.
Don't tell me which zone is for stopping and which zone is for loading.
Listen, Betty, don't start up with your white zone shit again.
Then they do a little more of this, people arriving and introducing the movie. And they bring him in for a third time.
There's just no stopping in a white zone.
Oh, really, Vernon? Why pretend? We both know perfectly well what it is you're talking about. You want me to have an abortion.
You want me to have an abortion. Now, the shock of that, like you do not expect that. You do not expect that.
Yeah.
And it's immediate shock humor.
We're in a daytime soap opera suddenly. We're in like a daytime drama.
I think it just sort of established that this movie is going to go to a level. It kind of prepared you for the pedophile jokes. It primed you for what is to come. We're going to go there. We're going to go for it. And I just thought it's just such a great joke.
What I had read was that dialogue was taken from a novel by Arthur Haley, who eventually wrote Airport, the movie Airport.
Arthur Haley wrote Zero Hour, too. He wrote a radio teleplay that was Zero Hour that they then adapted into a novel that was Zero Hour, and then they adapted it into the movie. It was adapted several times.
But I think that dialogue came from an Arthur Haley book.
Let me just add to that that dialogue between the two little kids who are acting like adults.
Yeah.
That is also from another movie. That's
from a different airplane movie.
From a whole other airplane disaster movie. So it's so funny. They just kept pulling from real sources. They just continually pulled from real sources because that's what the funniest stuff is anyway, right? Why not?
What's that? What's the name of that movie? It's called
I have it. Crashing.
Yeah. Crash Landing. Crash
Landing, yeah.
I happened to be passing and I thought you might like some coffee.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Thank you. Won't you sit down?
Sugar?
No, thank you. I take it black.
No, thank you. I take it black. Like my man.
It came out the year after 0 Hour, and it's the only thing from that other movie that they used here. Everything else in it pretty much comes from 0 Hour or from some cliche that was in one of the airport movies. What do you think of the Mayo Clinic?
I like the mayonnaise. I'm totally down with the mayonnaise. Yeah, I'm totally down with it, and I'm down with the setup for the phone joke. Him saying it.
It's one of my favorite things in there. The beating heart sitting in the ashtray is funny. But then you cut back to it and the heart is bouncing around on the desk. It's an escalation of it that makes it even funnier. And then you get through that whole scene, and at the end, Captain Over is told there's another call, Mr. Ham on line 5, and he says, "Give me ham on 5, hold the mayo." And that is what we in the business call the button.
The button again, the button.
Now there's the joke, and then there's the button at the end of the joke.
Okay.
And I'm pointing out all the buttons because buttons.
Let's step back now and talk about the making of this movie just a little bit. We're not going to go on and on, but just a little bit of background here. So Zaz, what is Zaz? Zaz was the Zucker brothers. That's two brothers. One is David. One is Jerry. And they had a friend named Jim Abrahams. Now, we're going to talk about their life story and their whole history later, as I said. But just so you know, that's what Zaz is. Zucker, Abrahams, Zucker. And they just were this great collaboration, and people think of them as an entity. They, of course, wrote and directed this movie. Again, we're going to get into their whole story eventually. But they started writing this movie very early on in their careers. Now, there's a movie before this we're going to talk a lot about, Kentucky Fried Movie. A lot of you know that movie. When they decided to make Kentucky Fried Movie, they had already been working on Airplane, believe it or not. What they used to do for fun is just tape all night, like with their VCR, stuff that was going on the overnight shift on TV. They would just tape all these old movies. They loved all that stuff, as you could guess. And they came upon this movie, 0 Hour, and thought, this is perfect. Like this should be a comedy.
I'm just impressed that they had $1,800 for a VCR.
Right, so it wouldn't have been. So how did they tape it? I don't know.
I mean, those were really expensive back then.
Yeah, I could swear I read that they were taping them. So I wonder.
No, I read the exact same thing. I'm sure they did have a VCR, but Like at the time, they cost the equivalent of, in those dollars, like $5,000.
Yeah, yeah. So they actually had a first draft written by 74. So they'd been working on it before 74, but they had the first draft basically going at 74, believe it or not. But they just, couldn't, they didn't think they could get anybody interested in Airplane. So they put it aside. They set it aside and worked on some other stuff. And then when they had a little success with their first movie, they decided, and John Landis, we will find out, spoiler alert, directed their first movie, he encouraged them to move forward with Airplane. So they actually bought the rights to the 0 Hour.
Once they had the script for Airplane, the studio said, well, this is too close. And then it turns out the rights were, because, who the hell wanted to make 0 Hour in 1978
Right.
or whenever? So they bought the rights to remake the movie for $2,500. That's how much they were charged, which is astounding. What's remarkable is not that when you watch 0 Hour, it's not just that, the name tag Stryker is the same, the story is the same, the large chunks of dialogue are taken verbatim.
How's the weather?
Not so good. We've got some heavy stuff ahead of us.
How's the weather?
Not so good. We got some heavy stuff ahead of us.
But it'll be different. Like it was in the beginning, remember?
I remember everything.
But it'll be different. Like it was in the beginning, remember?
I remember everything.
Well, that's the whole story, Martin. Everything we know. All right, Harry, let's face a few facts.
That's the whole story there, Rex. Everything we know. All right, Steve, let's face a few facts.
I just wanted you to know now. I'm very proud.
I wanted you to know now. I'm very proud.
How about some coffee, Johnny?
How about some coffee, Johnny?
No thanks.
The shots are the same. The setups are exactly the same. And that's
Right.
what really blows your mind when you watch it. It's that they didn't just take the script. They took the movie itself. They set the camera in the exact same place and they set up the shots the exact same way and had them play out exactly the same way. And that's what makes watching 0 Hour so amazing now.
They continually were watching it as they were filming Airplane. They were continually go back to it and actually watch it and be like, how did they set up these shots? They were matching it, So they actually wanted to do Airplane in black and white. They wanted it to be the same kind of airplane. The person in charge of Paramount at that time was Michael Eisner. He did not want it to be in black and white. He wanted it to be a real normal jet. So he put his foot down on that. They were really upset about that. They wanted it to be black and white.
Well, that's odd to me because that's basically like remaking a movie that no one's ever heard of, and that doesn't make sense. If the reason this movie was such a big hit is because the country had just come from 10 years of airport movies. There was one almost every year for like a decade. The first one came out in 1970, and that was just Airport, and then there was one like every other year since that time. I went to see those movies. I went to see Airport 77. The Concorde was Airport 79, I think. There was the one where the airplane ends up at the bottom of the sea. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're all structured like this in that you meet the big cast of characters that are getting on the plane at the beginning of the movie, and they're all played by well-known celebrities of the time. Usually at least one of the people in the movie is a professional athlete who is acting, and that's why Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is in this movie.
Well, actually, 0 Hour, the lead pilot, was a famous football player.
Who I didn't know about. I was surprised by that. I thought the reason they had Kareem in this movie is because all of those airport movies, there's always someone like O.J. Simpson is in it, and I always assumed that they had originally wanted O.J. for Airplane, but then they couldn't get him, so they put him in The Naked Gun later. Yeah, back in 1957, that guy was the co-pilot in 0 Hour was a professional athlete, doubling as an actor.
They wanted to match perfectly. They wanted to match perfectly with that movie. The pilot was played by Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch. He was a very famous football player at the time. By the way, 0 Hour also has an exclamation point, just like Airplane. They really, really wanted to match. They wanted it so matchy-matchy.
That's remarkable, yeah.
Also in 0 Hour, Dana Andrews, who was very big at the time.
Very, very boring actor. He's so deadly dull.
But he's supposed to be. He plays the boring guy. That's how he is.
No,
he's supposed to be boring.
he's meant to be this heroic leading man, but oh God, he's plodding.
If you've seen Night of the Demon, you know
Puts me to sleep.
You've seen Dana Andrews. Linda Darnell, man, read her Wikipedia entry, her personal life. Read her personal life. Holy Toledo.
Okay.
Interesting personal life. She died at 41 of burns. She died in a fire, but she had a crazy life leading up to that. Oh, this woman. So Linda Darnell plays the wife. You'd never guess it watching this movie. The stormy, and she was in love with Howard Hughes, and he rejected her, and all this stuff. All right, Sterling Hayden, we love Sterling Hayden.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't blame him for being an anti-communist. No. He was just roped into that. He is a good guy. Don't cancel Sterling Hayden. We love him.
We love Sterling Hayden so much, and he plays the Robert Stack character. He plays the character who becomes Rex Kramer in this.
And then, like we said, it was written by one of the writers, and the main writer who came up with the story was Arthur Haley, who had gone to, doing a bunch of things, but that included writing Airport, the novel Airport. So it's sort of funny that they based it on this movie, and then what Michael Eisner wanted them to do was sort of make it more, like a generalized disaster movie, parodying movies like Airport, which Arthur Haley also wrote. So it's really kind of funny, full circle kind of thing.
By the way, if I'm not remembering right, O.J. Simpson was in The Towering Inferno. I don't think he was in any Airport movies, but he was in The Towering Inferno.
And they wanted Pete Rose. They wanted Pete Rose in Airplane.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
okay.
I don't know. Kareem is perfect. He's perfect.
No, I love Kareem. One of my favorite things is seeing Kareem in this. I'm a big Kareem fan. As you know, I really enjoyed the show Winning Time on HBO, which was all about the Lakers of that era and the time when Kareem was a player there, right around 1980. And in that show, they show a scene where he's filming his scene in Airplane.
Oh,
and they
great.
show the actor who plays Kareem, who's very, very good. His name is Solomon Hughes, a complete unknown who they discovered, who's amazing. And they show him filming this scene, and he grabs the kid and he says, listen, you tell your old man I'm out there busting my buns every night. You try dragging Walton up and down the court, for 45 minutes. And then at the end of the scene, the kid actor asks him for his autograph, and he says, "Fuck off, kid." And Kareem himself wrote a little column about the show saying, obviously that's a fiction. I never told a child to fuck off. But they do show Kareem walking away from the set, and you see the Zaz sitting there directing. And it's not actors playing them, it's them.
It's them. Oh, well, there you go.
For real, playing themselves.
It seems... Why would they do that? They should get actors.
No, because they're like 70 now. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. They're like 70 now. Yeah.
Well, other people. So for the lead, as far as other roles, we got Robert Hayes, but other people. Michael Eisner was interested in Barry Manilow. I don't know. Bruce Jenner, David Letterman auditioned for this.
What's wrong with him?
It's Lieutenant Hurwitz, severe shell shock. He thinks he's Ethel Merman.
You'll be swell. You'll be great.
And Letterman, really, they kind of roped him into that. He never wanted to be an actor. Letterman never wanted to be an actor. And they were like, no, please, just audition. We just want to see if you could do it. But he really never wanted to do it. So, I had
heard a story that he signed a 3-picture deal with Disney, or it was like Touchstone, which was Disney at the time, like early in the 80s. And then after about a year, he changed his mind and gave them all the money back.
Yeah, like I'm sure his agent just tried to convince him to be an actor because it made sense, but he was just like, I can't act. What are you people doing? That I can picture him being like that.
He couldn't have been as good as Robert Hayes. Robert Hayes is so good in the movie.
You can't get better than Robert Hayes.
What a pisser.
So this was Robert Hayes' first movie, although he was doing Angie. So his first big gig was on the TV show Angie with Donna Pescow. I remember that show. I used to watch it.
Donna Pescow, who famously danced with John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever.
Exactly. So he was doing both things at once. So he was bringing Donna Pescow to the set. So she was there for the dance scene. Nearby, they were filming Urban Cowboy. Yes, they were filming Urban Cowboy. And of course, she knew John Travolta very well, and she introduced Mr. Hayes and Mr. Travolta. Now, I don't think he saw them filming any of the Saturday Night Fever parody, but they obviously talked about it. So
he would have been. I think he would have been pleased because Hayes does a very credible Travolta in this. I mean, he's really nailing he nails the dancing. He could have been in Saturday Night Fever. No, he couldn't have. He couldn't have played an Italian guy from Brooklyn, but he did the dancing as well as he could do it.
Other person this was the first movie for was Julie Haggerty. This was her first movie. Yep. And she was from Ohio and wide-eyed and just like, sure, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. She didn't know what to expect. This was a big, overwhelming experience for her. She said Robert Hays was amazing to work with. She said, thank God for him because he really put her at ease. Robert Hays, by the way, famously terrific person. Like, we like to point out when people are really nice because you hear so much about how people aren't very nice in Hollywood. Robert Hays is absolutely one of the nice guys. Like, everybody unanimously says he is just the nicest person. So everybody loved working with him. Pretty sure everybody probably had a good time working with Julie, too, because she sounds like she's awfully sweet. Robert Hays had a college roommate. Did you know who Robert Hays' college roommate was?
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Someone in the movie.
Oh.
David Leisure. David Leisure.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
They were roommates in college.
Two actors who came up at the same time, probably.
Yeah, so he dragged him onto the movie. He got him on board. And David Leisure's great as one of the Hare Krishnas. Now, that's fun, sort of funny. Those jokes, there's a lot of jokes in this movie that are so contemporary to 1980 that, you know, like, I don't know if young people understand. Now, we all know charity muggers. If you live in a city, you know what a charity mugger is. Someone who accosts you on the street, tries to get you to give. But, oh my gosh, Hare Krishnas and people in religious cults and religions and, you know, you have no idea. Like, the fact that they hit that note so hard, that they hit that joke over and over and over and hit it so hard, is because that's really what it was like in the 70s. We're not kidding.
Yeah,
we were there.
I don't have any memory of being accosted by people in airports.
I do,
but I think that was a thing at one point. Yeah, it was a thing. And it was back in the days when it was much easier to walk into an airport and just hang around.
Right.
As, you know, the security in airports is much greater than it was back then. I remember the days when you could meet someone getting off the plane. You could go to the gate and wait for them as they got off the plane, which you can't do anymore. You can only go through security if you have a ticket. It's very different now. There were many more people wandering around the airport who didn't have a flight back then. Yeah.
No, I remember them being just insanely obnoxious, and they would follow you and they wouldn't leave you alone, and it was really hard to shake them off. So when you see Robert Hays punching one, it was a very satisfying feeling because you knew how that felt. Like, they would not, it was very hard to shake them. They were a little bit intimidating, actually.
Even more so when Robert Stack comes into the airport later, when McCluskey comes into the airport, or Rex Kramer, rather, comes into the airport later, and he's just flipping them over and karate chopping them one at a time. And by the way, that's him. He's really... He does that, like, backflip over one of these guys and then karate chops him to the ground. And that's not a stunt person. That's Robert Stack doing it. It's amazing.
Now, let me just finish up with the cast. Of course, we have the legends, Peter Graves, Robert Stack, Leslie Nielsen. This was, you know, these were first comedy roles for all of these people.
Yeah, Robert Stack had done 1941, but that is arguably a comedy.
Yes, that's arguable.
It may not be.
Am I forgetting someone? I feel like I'm forgetting someone.
Lloyd Bridges,
right.
Yeah.
Of course. So I knew I was forgetting someone. So those people all came in, just they're all legends. And Peter Graves, when he first looked at the script, was like, no, I don't even understand this. Like, I don't understand this at all. And, you know, really wasn't interested. And I believe his wife and other people, you know, really urged him to take another look. They said, no, actually, this is really funny.
I don't think he ever quite got it, though.
And it's possible he never quite got it. That's what they say. Who knows? You know, who knows? Also, that kind of script is going to be hard to visualize. You know, it's a really different kind of script.
Yeah, it's going to look very dry on the page.
Yeah.
It's not going to make any sense on the page. Right.
Yeah, Julie Haggerty said that a lot of it wasn't fleshed out for her till she actually saw it.
Yeah, I saw Robert Stack in an old movie. Oh, it was the original To Be or Not to Be, Ernst Lubitsch movie with Jack Benny and Carole Lombard, which is a great, hilarious movie. And Robert Stack is in that as a young soldier, and he's very, very young and so shockingly hunky. He's really like the beefcake in that movie. Then, of course, you see him in this movie. He's 61 years old. He's still kind of a super stud, macho, hunky guy. And that is an easily solved mystery. Huh?
What am I'm missing the joke. There's some reference.
The host of Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh, yeah. I never watched that show. I watched In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. That was my show.
That's a different era, but yeah, sure.
There's also two more secret ingredients I'd like to talk about why this movie is so great. Why this movie is so great.
Right.
Now, here's one thing. Everybody really loved making this movie. This is not like a lot of the movies we've covered, like Cabin Boy or Team America, where it was just hell hacking their way through these movies. It was a really rough ride for a lot of these people. People really enjoyed being on the set. So Zaz, those guys were pretty cool with everybody. But one of the secret ingredients was Howard Koch. He was the producer of this. Michael Eisner put him on it. He was a little bit of a legend, you know, among people who knew people in the biz. He was a legendary producer. He had directed Andy Hardy movies. He directed The Untouchables. And he had produced The Manchurian Candidate. You know, he produced some pretty amazing stuff. Was a real old hand in the biz. But on top of that was just like, not only just very efficient and good at his job, but like the nicest person in the world. He was so nice. Everybody just says he was the glue, you know, as far as this production. He really held it together, made everybody feel really comfortable. Another secret ingredient is that they kept rewriting the script. So like I said, they had a first draft in 1974. There were dozens of drafts. They were rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting all the way through, you know, through all of this. And then when the movie was done, they had overshot. Of course, they had way more jokes than they needed. And they shopped it around at the colleges and they would listen for who was laughing. When they didn't hear laughing, they just cut the scene. The amount of time that went into this movie, prep time, the amount of editing, the amount of just like winnowing down a million jokes all the way down to just like an hour and 20 minutes. That is a secret ingredient.
Yeah.
I wonder why, you know, people don't put more time into the scripts.
Well,
you know,
that's
and
the
just
thing. Comedy needs to be worked over. You know, it takes 6 months to write a Simpsons script. And it's written over and over again and rewritten and rewritten. And with a comedy like this, you test it out, like a stand-up testing their material in clubs before they go on The Tonight Show. You test and test and hone and hone and test and test and hone and hone. And that's why no matter how much money you pay to see an improv show, it's too much.
Oh, Elmer Bernstein, the score, Elmer Bernstein.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to bring up now is the score. It's one of the best things about this movie is the score that Elmer Bernstein wrote. Elmer Bernstein is one of my favorite composers, and the score, like the whole, you know, philosophy of the movie, sticks to play it straight. Play it absolutely straight, play it absolutely serious, and it will be funny. And it is. And the score is so brilliant because it takes you right into the tone of the movie, which is that, yes, this is a serious adventure movie, and that contrasts with all the wacky, funny stuff that's going on. But if it was music that told you it was funny, it wouldn't work at all. It almost seems like he's parodying Bernard Herrmann. Because it has that sound of like, you know, there's that da 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 da, there's that floating da 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 da, but then the stabs of dididun dididun dididun. It's very Bernard Herrmann-esque, and it reminds me of like the music that goes with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because that was BBC library music that they found. And it was meant as this serious adventure music. And that's why it makes that movie work so well, is because they used serious adventure music, and Elmer Bernstein's doing the exact same thing here.
They said to him, we want it to be like a B movie. They had to sort of convince him to not elevate it too much. You know, they had to sort of say, make sure it's a little bit cheesy. You know,
Right,
just a little
right.
bit cheesy.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
He also did the scores for the Ivan Reitman movies. He did the Ghostbusters score. He did one of my favorite musical scores of all time, which is for the 1981 movie Heavy Metal. Everybody knows the songs from that movie, like, you know, the Black Sabbath song and Devo songs, but the score is actually really legitimately great. If you can find the orchestral score for Heavy Metal, hard to find, it's really great.
All right, there you go. All right, let's talk about this movie. Airplane. So we already talked about the opening. One of the first jokes is the airplane crashing through the terminal. It crashes through the window, right?
Right.
That model was $40,000.
I believe it.
$40,000.
I believe it.
Yeah.
It's an incredible
Yeah.
amount of money to spend for one gag, but what a great
Yep.
gag. And it's worth it because, you know, you see that and you think, oh, we're in a real movie there. The thing is, every time I watch it, I always think, well, it wobbles a little bit as it goes through the window. Obviously, they had one take to do. Okay, they couldn't do it, but
Yeah.
it wobbles a little and you can sort of see it's not really, the nose of the plane isn't really attached to a plane. And you can kind of see that. And I'm sure they thought, oh, no one's going to notice it. Look, you're going to see this movie in a theater and you're going to see it once and you're going to laugh and you're not going to watch it over and over again on anything like home media. It was 1980. Nobody anticipated that. If you look very closely, the people reacting to it are like running away and screaming as it crashes through in slow motion. and there's one person in the crowd who's holding a baby swaddled, and they throw the baby up in the air and run away. I want to mention some of the cultural references that are outdated, maybe, that we maybe don't know if they make sense anymore. There's a lot of them. There's a scene that references the movie From Here to Eternity, where Ted and Elaine are kissing on the beach and the water rolls over them. Now, I read that the Zaz put that joke in the movie despite having never seen From Here to Eternity. And I love that because one of the things that really informs the humor of this movie is Mad Magazine. It's so informed by Mad Magazine. These guys were baby boomers and they would have grown up reading Mad Magazine. This humor is all about that Mad Magazine mentality. And the best example of that is that they referenced a movie they had never seen. Because, of course, as little kids reading Mad Magazine, we also knew that reference. We also knew, growing up in the 70s, From Here to Eternity, and kissing on the beach and the water going over, and we had no idea what it meant. We only knew From Here to Eternity and that scene because it was in Mad Magazine.
So yeah, they've said that Mad Magazine was, and there's no question. I mean, it couldn't be more clear, that that's an inspiration for this movie.
I think so. Magazine. I mean, it plays like a Mad Magazine parody of an airport movie. There's the scene where the woman thinks to herself, Jim never has a second cup at home. That's from a commercial that ran over and over again in the 70s for U-Ban coffee, where they're at a dinner party and the guy is offered a second cup of coffee to show the horror of a wife starting to doubt whether her coffee is good, whether her husband likes her coffee, which is the worst possible thing that could have happened to a housewife in the 70s.
And let's just interject that if you were in that age, contemporary, you were forced to watch the same commercials over and over. You had no choice.
Right.
You did not have ads catered to your age group and your interests. You weren't getting nothing but H&M ads because you're 20-something or pet ads because they knew you had a pet. You just sat there and everybody, the entire millions and millions of us in America, watched the same ads every night. Whatever it was that was in front of us, that's what we took. And U-Ban coffee ad was shown ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum, literally.
Ad nauseum,
Yeah, and right, exactly. And you couldn't fast forward or anything. You just had to sit there and watch these commercials.
You had to just sit there and watch it. You could shut the sound off is the best you could do.
But, it was a string of, there were a lot of commercials at that time where a housewife is on the verge of suicide because her husband doesn't like her coffee. And then, of course, that gag would be funny on its own if they just showed the wife going, Jim never has a second cup, because then it was just, you're referencing a thing. In the 20 years of lesser spoof movies that happened after this movie, 20 or 30 years, all the scary movies and Not Another Teen Movie and all those things, they basically reduced it to just the first half of this gag, where they're just referencing something from the culture and that's enough. And that's it. But in this movie, it comes back later on when Jim throws up. And they show the housewife again going, Jim never vomits at home, which is the joke. Mm-hmm. That's the actual joke. The reference isn't the joke. It's the punchline on top of the reference that's the joke. I guess people forgot about that. All of the people the people who made Airplane 2 probably forgot about that.
Well, I think it was kind of the joke. I mean, I think that even just the reference was the joke, just because it was, again, just so cliche. You just had it so drilled into your head. And, there's a little surprise.
But the Zaz knew that just referencing something's not enough of that's not a joke. That's not enough of a joke. You actually have to do something with it after you reference it,
Well, the reason it is especially funny, though, is that, the little secret ingredient is that was the actual woman in the ad.
No.
That was the actual, yes, you didn't notice that?
I know.
That's her. That's her.
Amazing.
That's the woman.
I did not even know
that's her.
That.
That's her.
That's incredible.
And they didn't know that when they hired her. She didn't want them to know that because she was afraid they wouldn't hire her if they knew that. That's what she claims. She claims that she thought they wouldn't hire her if they knew that she was the actual woman. Because when she saw that joke, she was like, oh, shit. They're joking about my commercial.
Wow.
They hired the woman who was in the ad. I'm going to show it here. You will see.
I did not know that. I had no idea. I genuinely didn't know that until now.
Sure you can't stay for more coffee?
It's late, and Jim never has a second cup.
I'd love another cup.
Jim never had seconds of my coffee. And I make pretty good coffee. But that night, we both discovered U-Ban.
Would either of you like another cup of coffee?
I will, but Jim won't.
I think I will have another cup of coffee.
Jim never has a second cup of coffee at home.
It's Leah Bryant is the coffee lady.
There's a joke where Dr. Rumack says about the mass poisoning on the airplane. He says, "This is the worst thing I've seen since the Anita Bryant concert." That's a reference to Anita Bryant, who was a singer and was also the TV spokesperson for, I think, Orange Juice.
Time to get up, kids. You too, Orange Birds. My twins love 100% orange juice from Florida any time of day.
But at this time, she was most known as a very vocal anti-gay activist. She had made very, very public statements against homosexuality and talking about this, how it was sinful. Famously, a gay activist went up to her at a press conference and hit her in the face with a pie around that same time, which was a heroic act. And so she was a punchline at that time, at that Anita Bryant. And the idea that someone would actually want to go and see her sing was completely absurd. And yes, it would induce vomiting. Much like the singing nun singing Aretha Franklin induces vomiting.
That singing nun is Maureen McGovern. Torn between two lovers. Talk about vomit inducing.
She famously sang in a real, genuine disaster movie, in 2 genuine disaster movies.
Oh, that's right. She did. I forgot
Morning
about
After
that.
in the Poseidon Adventure.
That's
and
right.
She sings another song that I don't know in the Towering Inferno.
It's here to guide us. We may never love like this again.
What was her connection to disaster movies? That's
I don't
too
know,
funny.
but Helen Reddy had played the singing nun in Airport, and then the studio heard of it and threatened to sue, so they couldn't get Helen Reddy to do it, so they got Maureen McGovern to it. There's also a reference to the famous Indian monk who lit himself on fire to protest, I believe it was the Vietnam War, at some point. And there's a scene where the running gag of Ted telling this sad story to people who then commit suicide. And one of them is a guy in a turban who's pouring gasoline on himself and lighting a match.
I didn't think they were being that specific, but I don't
assumed
know.
it was
That's
a
pretty
reference to
morbid
that.
if they were.
Yeah.
I think that was a more common thing you'd hear about back then was people doing that in general. You know what I mean? Like as far as suicide, you know.
I don't know. I assumed it was a specific reference to that. But it does lead me to point out that Ted Stryker is a hero for saving everyone on the plane except for the 3 people he killed.
Yes, on the plane.
He kills 3 people
right,
during
exactly.
the flight by driving them to suicide with his long, boring stories of his
The
sad
old
life.
lady, Ann Nelson plays the old lady.
No wonder you're upset. She's lovely. And a darling figure. Supple, pouting breasts, firm thighs.
She is
She's
just,
perfect. Absolutely wonderful.
just
Yes.
perfect. She is so good.
I remember when we first met. It was during the war.
And then
I love
the
her.
great James Hong plays a
yes.
He's meant to be someone from World War II, like a kamikaze pilot or something like that, or just a general.
Such a minor thing for him. At that point, you'd think he would. That's a little too small a role for him, even at that point. You know what I mean? Like it's such a small.
Have you
wordless,
looked at his IMDb page? No role was too small for him. James Hong never said no to a role.
I guess not.
Ever.
Yeah, we forgot Jimmy Walker's cameo.
Jimmy Walker.
Walker's
Well,
cameo.
as long as we're talking cameos, yeah, Jimmy Walker plays like a gas station attendant at the beginning of the movie, which is a great gag. And again, you just show him working on the airplane as if he's working on a car, checking the oil and wiping the windows. That's funny. Then he tries to close the lid and falls off the airplane. That's the button.
That's the button.
I don't know why this means button. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have started that. The real Ethel Merman appears.
See, now we're going too fast now. Now we're ruining these jokes.
I'm sorry.
Ethel Merman's one of my favorite jokes. That almost made my top 5. And that's our last movie appearance. That was her last appearance. She died sometime after that. But oh my gosh, that is so friggin' funny. So one of the soldiers is in the hospital.
Lieutenant Hurwitz.
He's already pointed out someone else is kind of like delusional. And he says, oh, and this guy thinks he's Ethel Merman. And then they cut, and it's Ethel Merman singing her cliche song, Everything's Coming a Present. She's so good. She's just she just does it so perfectly. And I love her. I love her. I love her.
Another cameo, Mike Ehrmantraut. It's actually Jonathan Banks, the actor who appears as one of the air traffic controllers. But it's I think it might be his first ever role or appearance in anything. but he is now currently a huge TV star because of his role as Mike Ehrmantraut in the series Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And he's also one of my favorite gags in the movie where they say, check the radar range. And that's another reference that's kind of outdated because nobody says radar range anymore. That's what we used to call a microwave oven. And he looks in on a turkey that's in the microwave, which is not how you made it. Nobody microwaved a turkey.
The airplane flying over a radio station that's announcing disco.
Right, that's such a dated reference, but they fly. It flies over the city, and the announcer says, "WZAZ, huh? WZAZ, where disco lives forever," and then the airplane takes out the antenna. This was 1980 was the absolute height of the disco sucks movement.
Right. So disco sucks was a real phenomenon. It was a real, believe it or not, I know that you can't imagine this. Young people, you know how great disco is. You know disco is magic.
Yeah.
You know that disco was like one of the lost art forms that, like you can't imagine anyone who could not like disco. Well, let me tell you, in the late 70s, there were bumper stickers on like one out of every 20 cars that said disco sucks. Those are the people who are into Kiss. Those are the people who are into The Who, okay? They were not allowed, for some reason, to like disco.
I mean, I liked both.
I did, yes.
And then the guys in Kiss certainly must have liked disco because they made a disco song.
Well, that's the thing, is like the musicians themselves, like the Rolling Stones would then record a disco song and their fans would get really upset, right? They'd record Miss You, and people would be like, what the hell are the Rolling Stones doing recording a disco song?
Well, the Who, for their part, never did a disco song, but they did do a song called...
No, they didn't. They couldn't. They had never sense of rhythm,
They did do a song called
so
Goodbye Sister Disco, which was more of an anti-disco song.
I think it's very hard for people, especially because this movie references Saturday Night Fever, which was such a huge hit.
Right.
You just assume that everybody loved disco. But there was a very trenchant anti-disco crowd. Okay, so let's take a break from the movie, and when we get back to the movie, we're going to talk about some of the more controversial jokes. We're going to talk about if these jokes can still stand up for themselves in the now and in the future. But let's take a break and just quickly get through a little bit about Zaz and what they're all about. So Jerry Zucker, David Zucker were brothers, and they had a childhood friend named Jim Abrahams, and they were living as little children and neighbors in Shorewood, Wisconsin. They were great friends. They would shoot basement versions of film and TV shows. A lot of kids were, Steven Spielberg, a lot of kids, if kids had access to anything like a video camera, they were doing stuff like that. They went to college, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I believe, to be the jokesters on campus and play practical jokes and do crazy things in the library, like set up elaborate dinners on the library tables, like suddenly have a butler walk in and place down a fancy tablecloth and dishware and serve them crazy foods and whatever. They just did these silly stunt things. Everybody knew them as the funny guys. You can imagine they were drawn to theater and performance, and they started putting together bits. And what they did was they formed their own little comedy troupe called Kentucky Fried Theater. They did this around Wisconsin, and they were a little more scripted, I think, than improv. They were a little more into scripting things. This was not like a classic improv group, but basically, they were doing sketch comedy. They became successful enough in their community that they decided, of course, let's go to LA. Like, that's what you do.
Yeah,
you go to LA when you have some success like that. And so they made their way down there, set up a thing called Kentucky Fried Theater there, same thing. And so they had some success. This is the kind of thing where they're just putting together sketch comedy and from the audience reaction, figuring out what's funny. They were just putting together
I would love to know what
sketch
actually went on in one of these shows. Like what?
I have a little bit. I'm going to insert a little glimmer of the Kentucky Fried Theater because they did a little appearance on the Midnight Special.
Oh.
And you will see Steven Stucker.
You mean Johnny?
Johnny from Airplane was one of the original members of Kentucky Fried Theater.
We drove together in Jerry's van. To pass time, we played fun games like this slide of Name the License Plate. And we played Who Ate the Beans for Lunch. We didn't actually have an opportunity to stop in Las Vegas, but we did drive through, and we saw the sights for which that town has become so well known. Oh, whoops. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got this one in backwards.
they claim that either in Wisconsin or in LA, Lorne Michaels was one of the visitors to the Kentucky Fried Theater, and that they inspired, of course, Saturday Night Live. Now, I haven't seen Lorne Michaels say this. I looked for it and couldn't find any quotes, so I don't know if that's
it's not
true.
Impossible, but I'd never heard anything like that. I mean, he may have been aware that there were these sketch groups around, but I don't know how much credit they can take for inspiring Lorne.
And, of course, they weren't the first sketch comedy group in the world.
No.
So, obviously, Second City had been going on since the late 50s.
Right.
We know that because of the In-Laws episode we did. That our audience knows that because Alan Arkin was one of the original members of Second City way back in, like, 61 or something like that, right?
Yes, that's right.
There's actually one other improv company, theater company in Minneapolis that was they're claimed to be the absolute first, and they're still going. They're called the Brave New Workshop.
Okay.
And they claimed, they started in 57 or something, or they started like the year before Second City started. So anyway, we've had this going on for quite some time. And as you could hear also from our In-Laws episode, the quality of the comedy was quite high, even way in the beginning. It was really good stuff. I mean, they were putting on albums already at the beginning. They had amazing people in these troupes. Coming from Brave New Workshop was Louis Anderson.
Oh, wow.
Tom Davis, Al Franken
Whoa.
came from Brave New
Wow.
Workshop. Yeah. Penn Jillette,
I never knew any of that.
Pat Proft, who ended up being a writer with Zaz.
Yeah.
They came from Brave New Workshop. That was out of Minneapolis. So it's not like the Kentucky Fried Theater Company was like some big novel thing. This had been, this was
There
going on.
were other comedy groups. There was the Committee was one.
Yeah.
And there was Ace Trucking Company. The Ace Trucking Company was the one with Fred Willard.
Yeah.
And Bill Saluga, most known as the You Don't Have to Call Me Ray guy. And then there was the Credibility Gap. That was Harry Shearer and David Lander. And I think Michael McKean was in that one as well.
Squiggy.
Yeah, Lenny and Squiggy both, which they did a lot of political humor. Their name comes from Watergate. Those are three that, off the top of my head, I can think of from the early 70s. And then there was Channel 1.
So again, there's a lot of this stuff going on. What ended up, so obviously, with Kentucky Fried Theater Company is they came out with a movie. That was the first movie that Zaz did. They had been writing these sketches. They put it all together. Kentucky Fried Movie.
I invite every man, woman, and child to share with me the joy and warmth of the Kentucky Fried Movie.
It's a collection of sketches. John Landis directed it.
Now, we should say it was John Landis's basically first. I mean, he had done one movie himself, Schlock.
Yeah, he had done Schlock, which was sort of a parody of a parody. Then this was the first really big budget movie he had to do. I love the Kentucky Fried Movie.
I'm not wearing any pants. Film at 11.
I watched it again recently. The Fistful of Yen. Oh God, it's so funny. It's the Airplane of kung fu movies. It's only a half an hour, or not even. It's maybe about 20 minutes, and it's an Airplane-like parody of a Bruce Lee movie, and it's perfect. Every joke in it is so funny. There's a couple of parts that drag. I think the whole courtroom sketch at the end drags, and I kind of fast forward through that. It's not that funny.
They got John Landis, and they had a buzz going, so they got some pretty cool cameos. They got Bill Bixby. They got Barry Dennen, who we love.
Yes, well, I live the unknown, I love the unknown, I am the unknown.
Claude, where are you living now?
That is unknown.
Henry Gibson's very funny.
Yes, Henry Gibson. Oh, that's a great sketch. So he's at first I thought it was really stupid, actually. Like when he just opens the sketch, I'm like, well, this is going to be kind of dumb. It's
United Appeal for the Dead.
United Appeal for the Dead. And it's about, your loved one has died and how you can continue to love your loved one by keeping them present in your life. But what makes that sketch is the body.
The body, yeah. It's really horrifying.
Death continues to be our nation's #1 killer.
But then we discovered the United Appeal for the Dead. They showed us that despite Johnny's handicap, he could still be a useful member of our family and the community.
But I mean, I love the signs of death, and one of them is occasional drowsiness.
We forgot to mention Donald Sutherland as far as another cameo. Donald Sutherland is another one.
As the clumsy waiter, and he's on screen for 3 seconds. It's great.
For like literally.
Yeah, and also in that same sketch, that's Armageddon. You also get James Bond, George Lazenby.
I love they have a school science film which is zinc oxide.
If it weren't for zinc oxide, you wouldn't have that bar of soap. The dish towels you use every day. Your toaster. That brassiere you're wearing. Your kitchen sink. Those curtain rods.
It's legendary, but what I wanted to talk about is that was not the only movie that was like that. People think of it as this kind of animal unto itself, but certainly that was not the case. And just as there were so many comedy troupes feeding into this system, there are actually a fair amount of these movies emerging from this system of workshops and troupes. So let's talk about that a little bit.
In New York, there was Channel 1. Channel 1 was Ken Shapiro, and Chevy Chase was a part of that as well, and they had all met at Bard College, and they basically had a similar thing where they rented a theater and did their shows. And they did these shows that were all sort of based on television. And they had televisions set up on the stage, and you'd go there, sit there, and watch what was on the television. So they would film sketches and play them on a television screen for an audience in the theater. And they were all basically parodies of television. And Ken Shapiro, who was the mastermind behind that, made a theatrical film of those sketches called The Groove Tube, which came out in 1974. The movie The Groove Tube, which starred Ken Shapiro, Chevy Chase, also Richard Belzer, who I think had replaced Chase in the group.
Yeah.
And Ken Shapiro made this film on a shoestring budget, did it all himself, and it was a huge hit, and it made millions of dollars. And it's really, really good. It's very, very dated to 1974. It's full of all kinds of questionable things and questionable humor. It's very R-rated, hard R-rated. Yes. I would say lots of nudity, lots of sex. Although I will give it a lot of credit for having more male than female nudity.
Yeah.
You see more dick than anything else. A lot of drug humor. But honestly, really funny, really entertaining. I recently rewatched The Groove Tube. A lot of it holds up. Some of it, oh God, no. But a lot of it holds up. And a lot of it is very good-natured and sweet. And then so when the Zaz got the chance to make a theatrical film, Kentucky Fried Movie, and it did have a higher budget than The Groove Tube, but if you watch it, what's remarkable is how similar it is to The Groove Tube.
Yeah.
It seems to have some very similar structure to it. It does include a long extended news segment, as The Groove Tube does. It builds around an extended 20-minute or half-hour long single sketch in the middle, which in Kentucky Fried Movie, it's Fistful of Yen. And in The Groove Tube, it's The Dealers, which is it's basically like a sitcom about drug dealers. So it's remarkably similar in structure, and there's even like a sketch that's like a huge corporation that destroys the environment trying to make themselves look good.
In how many ways can one make the world a little bit better?
At Argonne, we're working to keep your money.
But it's all based on television and television commercials and television shows. And what's remarkable is how closely Kentucky Fried Movie fits the template of The Groove Tube as a movie. I'm not saying that it's a ripoff, but I'm saying that people tend to think of the Kentucky Fried Movie as the best sketch comedy movie of the 70s, and the Groove Tube is kind of a cruder, lesser version of it. But the Groove Tube did come first, and I think the Groove Tube is very, very good.
I think it's much better. I don't think it's better.
I don't think it's better.
I think it's better. Yeah, I think it's better.
I also have to give credit to the That Week in SNL podcast, because they recently did an episode where they analyzed the Groove Tube, and they came up with a theory that because Ken Shapiro had worked somewhat with Lorne Michaels after the Groove Tube was such a hit, he had a production deal that really influenced Saturday Night Live, and that really was what shaped Saturday Night Live more so than Kentucky Fried Theater.
It has
because
to be.
so much of the humor that Ken Shapiro was doing in Channel 1 and in the Groove Tube, like the news, like the idea of having a fake news segment in there, was sort of cribbed by Lorne Michaels.
Good night. and have a pleasant tomorrow.
There's a lot of GrooveTube DNA in early Saturday Night Live. A lot.
And clearly Chevy Chase, obviously Chevy Chase by himself.
And taking Chevy Chase there. Yeah, exactly.
1974 GrooveTube.
Yeah.
It is such a good, I mean, there's a few clunkers, but the thing with GrooveTube is it gets you right from the beginning. The opening segment, it's a sexy bit where this guy, he picks up a hitchhiker and she leads him into the forest naked. And the ending is actually really stupid, but it doesn't matter because the whole rest of it is so well done. This movie kind of captures the sweet side of the sexual revolution, which you don't see too often, because most people just don't know how to make these jokes without coming off as sleazy and completely unfunny. Whereas this movie actually navigates this kind of teenage boy, like 12-year-old humor, 14-year-old boy humor, in a way that they actually pull it off. Mostly it's not really very offensive. They even have a whole thing, some kind of sex game tournament where it's like it's the Olympics of sex.
This is Channel One's Wild World of Sports.
This is Bob Van Horn back in sunny Tijuana, Mexico, live via Early Bird satellite for the final event of the day in the 34th Annual International Sex Games. You are now looking at the West German team, Kurt Stem, Christina Busch. They will be performing the final and most important event in the competition, the freestyle.
And so they're showing two people making love, and it's like they're scoring them as they're doing it. But it's not offensive. It's actually like there's something really fun
it's very
about
well done. That's one of the better. That's one of the better
really
sketches in it.
You know, again, this era, of course, the 70s and the 80s were known for, you know, these ridiculous, like very offensive use of sex in comedy that often was really abusive towards women and, you know, objectifying women in a way that was not funny at all. I mean, it's, you know, it can be funny to objectify men and women in a sexual way if you do it right? Like, first of all, it needs to be a little bit even. You know, it's just nice to see examples. Like we talked about with the end of Animal Crackers with Harpo and how they end it with him knocking out, this woman. And like, you have to go back and see our episode. I'm not going to go and explain that. But, you know, it's really nice to see how you can do these jokes in a way that is not offensive. You can do sex jokes. You can do objectifying jokes. You can do, you know, like playing games with the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever sex you're attracted to kind of jokes without it insulting anybody. It can be done. Now, they have a segment where it's a PSA kind of safety, you know, like learn to be hygienically safe.
Avoid STDs.
Avoid STDs. It's PSA. And the person delivering the speech is an actual man's penis. Like
It's a talking
penis. And it's a real...
And balls.
And balls, yeah. It's unbelievable. And it takes you a minute.
Yeah, it's a slow burn. You're like, wait a minute, what am I looking at exactly? And oh, God. Yeah.
Here's some of the things that they get away with on just a couple more things they get away with on the GrooveTube. I don't know how they do it. This is, again, like the South Park thing. I don't know what magic wizard formula they came up with, but they do. The Uranus Corporation.
At Uranus, things come out a little differently.
They show I believe it's actual excrement, or it's an incredible facsimile.
It's very well made. I'm sure it's fake, but it's very well made.
And it's behaving in a way, and they're closing in on the shots of this excrement and how it's behaving. It's something. For those of you who are squeamish, you might not want to check that out, but it's really funny. I don't like shit jokes. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Now, Coco the Clown.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I love Coco the Clown.
Now, we're going to get into this. Again, this is pedophilia jokes. Now.
It's not. No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
It is.
No, it isn't. It is a TV. It's a TV clown who hosts a kids show, but when the adults are out of the room, he reads erotica to the kids at their request.
At their request.
The kids are writing in and saying, could you read page 47 of Lady Chatterley's Lover to us, and requesting that, and he sits there and reads to them. It's not pedophilia.
All of the big people are out of the room. Okay.
Now we have another request here from Kippy Pratt of Springfield, and he asks for page 43 of Philosophy in the Bedroom by Marquis de Sade.
It is simply sophisticated adult entertainment for children. The joke in the movie is that these kids are sophisticated adults who enjoy
No, that's not the joke. It's not that kids are prepared for that. It's that this guy's getting away with murder. That's what it is.
I'm sorry. No, I did not in any way take it in that movie because that would be very sinister, and it's ultimately a good-natured film.
Okay. Anyway, we're going to move
That's
on
not
from
what
that,
he's
except to
doing.
say that it is really friggin' funny. It is funny. And what's the reason they get away with it? And again, like we have to talk about this with Airplane. Well, if you're me, I think clearly Coco is sinister. And that's why it's okay.
I never got
You're
that he was
making fun of
sinister.
the fact that he's sinister and that he's getting away with this.
To me, the joke was always that the audience of children have sophisticated adult tastes. That's always been obviously the joke.
The Marquis. Have you ever read the Marquis de Sade show?
That's not. Well, he's not reading the Marquis de Sade. He's reading from Lady Chatterley's Lover, first of all.
All right.
And
anyway, let's move on.
Look, Monty Python did a similar joke, although they had the person reading the erotic story to children horrified at what he's doing.
Hello, children. Here is this morning's story. One day, Ricky the Magic Pixie went to visit Daisy Bumble in her tumble-down cottage. He found her in the bedroom. Roughly, he grabbed her heavy shoulders, pulling her down onto the bed and ripping off her...
And that's how they got away with it. The joke is not that he's an evil clown. The joke is...
Oh, my gosh.
The joke is that he and the kids are on the same level.
In any case...
I so disagree that if the joke is that he's a pedophile clown, what's the joke? That's not funny.
It's just depicting this kind of sinister person in this way that's very dry. Ken Shapiro nails the acting. The contrast between how he's acting when the parents are in the room and how he's acting when the parents are asked to leave the room
but then why is
such a huge contrast that it's beautiful.
Why are the kids writing in to request chapters? Why are the kids writing in to request the chapter they want to hear that
Well, first of all, who knows if they actually are? But but in any case, even if they are,
in the sketch, it's taken as real.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a fantasy. You're not supposed to be thinking that this is healthy in any way. Okay, you're not.
No, in real life, it would not be. But it's a comedy sketch, and the joke is not sexualizing children. The joke is simply that these children are sophisticated.
No, it's not about the kids. It's about him. It's all about him. It's just all 100% about him.
I never even considered that.
In any case, so
not for a second. It's a funny. We both agree it's a funny sketch.
We both agree it's a funny sketch,
but for the wrong reasons.
The groove tube ends with a musical number that's delightful, just delightful.
Lovely. Just you, just me. Let's find a cozy spot to cuddle and woo.
So what happened was a whole spate of those kinds of movies came out, and they all had several things in common. They all were parodying TV. They all were just a series of, like a lot of commercials, and then a certain amount of parodying TV shows or sometimes films. They all had lots of boobs and nudity and, very crude sex humor.
Yeah.
And then a lot of lowbrow, like a lot of gross out humor. And then the other thing they had in common was they all drew from these comedy troupes. Like they all were pretty much drawing from, and Howard Hessman isn't like in every friggin' one of these. Like for some reason, Howard Hessman's in like every single one. I don't know why. And so what was funny is they would get these stars and before they were famous, and then nobody would go to these movies. And then when Bill Murray eventually became famous, and Chevy Chase eventually became famous, and Howard Hessman eventually became famous, they'd kind of like come back. They'd put them front and center on the poster.
They slap them on the VHS box, Yeah, there's that sketch comedy movie from like 1978, which is called Loose Shoes. It's just a collection of sketches. It's another movie like this, and one sketch. There's one prison sketch that Bill Murray is in, and that's it.
It's Loose Shoes with Bill Murray.
What the hell is this crap?
WKRP's Howard Hessman. Buddy Hackett.
The Society to Oppress and Prevent Involuntary Tinkling.
JP Morgan.
The kid won't stop pissing.
But if you look on eBay now for a VHS of Loose Shoes, you'll find a picture of Bill Murray from around 1986, from about 10 years after the movie, slapped onto the box. And that's all that's on the box. It's a big picture of Bill Murray, and it says, Bill Murray in this movie. He's literally in 5 minutes of the movie.
So some of the other iterations of this, are Loose Shoes, which is also known as Coming Attractions. A lot of these have several titles because they released them several times.
Yeah. They got knocked around from distributor to distributor. Yeah.
78, Bill Murray, Howard Hessman, Buddy Hackett's in it. It's a lot of interesting kind of cult favorites. Sid Haig.
Sid Haig, yes.
Sid Haig is in it. Kinky Friedman
Oh,
Harry
boy.
Shearer, Susan Tyrrell, and Van Dyke Parks are in that. So there's always like interesting people, like with really small bit parts. Some of them also old legends in some of these movies. There was Tunnel Vision. That was one of the earlier ones, 76. This is Chevy Chase, John Candy. For 2 seconds, for literally 2 seconds, you see John Candy. Howard Hessman, of course, Joe Flaherty, Lorraine Newman, Al Franken, Ron Silver's first appearance in any movie is in Tunnel Vision. There is not. It's with all those names. This is a full movie, hour and 20 minutes, whatever, in this entire movie. I will tell you, there is not one funny joke. Not one. There is not one.
I believe it.
There's not even one funny joke.
I believe that is possible. Yes.
I'm not kidding.
That is entirely within the realm of possibility for these films.
There's American Raspberry, which is also known as Primetime.
It's the motion picture that grabs TV by the dials and won't let go.
Morning mist in 2 natural fragrances. Rose petal and herring.
And that has, believe it or not, Warren Oates. Warren friggin' Oates is in that movie.
Wow.
Harry Shearer was in a lot of these.
He's in all of them. I think he's in every one of them.
Kinky Friedman's in a few of these. And that has a sketch. The only memorable sketch is the Charles Whitman Invitational, where they do a parody of a contest of shooting people from a tower.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, back when you could make that joke because it was a little less of a ubiquitous thing.
It sounds
Okay.
tiresome.
Cracking Up, 1977.
Not the Jerry Lewis Cracking Up. Not the movie that Jerry Lewis directed called Cracking Up from 1983, which we've discussed on this show before.
That's Michael McKean and
David Lander and Harry Shearer again.
Fred Willard's in that. Phil Proctor.
Oh, that's from Firesign Theater. I don't think I've ever seen that one.
The legend is it's not funny at all. You can look for that. See if you find it, let us know. Oh, yeah, we should also mention Mr. Mike's Mondo video, which is quite good.
Come with me to the incredible world of Mr. Mike's Mondo Video.
A crazy world of Mondo Video.
Yeah.
79. That's 79.
It's different because it was made for television. It was made for the Saturday Night Live time slot, and then once O'Donoghue finished it, the NBC said, there is no fucking way we're putting this on television. It so offended them, and so they basically let Michael O'Donoghue buy the rights back to it, and he managed to get it a theatrical release. There's a legendary screenplay that Michael O'Donoghue wrote, which is basically another movie like this, exactly like Kentucky Fried Movie, where it's an evening of television where you're getting a series of sketches which are based on TV shows, all surrounding a feature film in the middle, which was like a parody of like a 1950s science fiction movie where a bunch of men go to Mars. And the movie that Michael O'Donoghue wrote would have been 4 hours long. The screenplay was legendary. It went around all over. Never got made. It changed hands, eventually morphed into Amazon Women on the Moon.
Amazon Women of the Moon, 1987. So that's several directors. Landis was one of the directors. Joe Dante. Carl Gottlieb, one of the writers of Jaws, for gosh sakes.
Oh, I know Carl Gottlieb's work very well. He wrote The Jerk. He was a member of one of those comedy troupes we mentioned earlier in the committee. He was a comedy guy to start out with.
Amazon Woman of the Moon has a few okay pieces in it.
I saw it in theater. It had some very good bits in it. It had some bits were tiresome, but it had some very good bits.
Yeah, Ed Begley Jr. is in a pretty good bit. Carrie Fisher is actually in it. Carrie Fisher. I love. They have a very cliche bit where it's like black people without soul. Like it's, this collection.
With David Alan Grier.
David Alan Grier. He's the best thing in the movie.
He's great. He's great.
The best thing in the movie. He does this. He just sings he sings Carpenter songs and, whatever, like the whitest songs you can think of in the whitest way possible.
Tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years. Do ya still want me?
And it's such a, obviously cliche joke. That was actually almost a classic joke by the year 1987. But he just nails it so hard. He's just so good. And I think, and they bring him back several times because he's so good. Arsenio Hall's in it. Lou Jacoby is in it.
Lou Jacoby,
Roseanne Arquette's in it. Michelle Pfeiffer's in it. I mean, it's pretty funny. Griffin Dunn. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad. And it's sort of like, it's almost like an unofficial sequel to Kentucky Fried Movie, only without the zazz. it doesn't have quite the zazz that Kentucky Fried Movie has, but it's still got John Landis involved, and honestly, it's not bad.
All right, so Zaz, let's just wrap this up. So instead of doing Airplane 2, they had nothing to do with Airplane 2.
Which is why I have nothing to do with Airplane 2. I've never seen it, and I never will.
Instead of doing Airplane 2, they wanted to do a series, which was Police Squad, starring Leslie Nielsen. There's only like 6 episodes. There's only 1 season, but it's quite cute. You know, it's funny because the first and the last episode are the least funny. I don't know why they didn't arrange those episodes very well.
I haven't rewatched it in a long time. I remember I watched it all when it was on during the the 6 weeks that it was a thing on American television. And I think the final episode never even aired, so there may have only been 5 that were ever aired.
Leslie Nielsen, of course, he had done 100 films and like over 1,000 TV appearances. He did Forbidden Planet, he did Poseidon Adventure. He's legally deaf. Did you know that Leslie Nielsen was legally deaf?
I did not know that. No.
Yes, he was. He wore a hearing aid that you didn't see. He was legally deaf. It's really interesting. He was made to do comedy, and he said that. He said, I've been doing, he did all these drama roles up until Airplane, and then he said, no, this is actually what I was meant to do. And you could see he just took to it like a fish in water, right?
But even if he was in a comedy, he never played a comedic role. He never was the one that was funny. He's in an old Don Knotts movie, The Reluctant Astronaut. And even in that movie, he's not the funny one. Don Knotts is the funny one. But like Robert Stack, if you watch old movies from the 50s and 60s with Leslie Nielsen in them, he's like a super hunky guy. He's like in The Reluctant Astronaut, he plays like a NASA astronaut. He's like this blonde Adonis.
Yeah. But then when he launched into comedy, he had these facial expressions that were pure, really genius comedian acting notes. He just, he was able to put on a face that was, only a really good comedian could do, I think.
Cribbins! Police squad! Follow that black car! The car! Follow that car!
Let's definitely check your mirror. Signal. Now pull into traffic.
I think this made Leslie Nielsen, but it also ruined him. Because after this, he started to think he was a hilarious clown and started acting like one in movies. And the whole power of his presence was lost at that point. And he sort of became, Robert De Niro eventually became Leslie Nielsen. Once Robert De Niro did his first comedy, it was all over. Because then he started doing more and more comedies. But the whole point of him being in his first comedy was that he wasn't known for comedy. He was known for being deadly serious all the time, and that's what made it so effective that he was in a comedy. Then he started doing tons of comedies and acting like a clown and being in Rocky and Bullwinkle, and then like the whole point of casting him in the first place in a comedy was lost. And I think that's exactly what happened to Leslie Nielsen. Eventually he was doing, Spy Hard and Mr. Magoo and Dracula Dead and loving it, and it just wasn't funny anymore to see Leslie Nielsen because he no longer had a reputation for being serious.
I disagree. I think he transcended into being an actually really good comedian. I think you could see in the Naked Gun movies, which were a little bit better than I remember them being. They really have their moments.
By the third one, he's mugging like a clown. It's just, it's like the whole point of casting him is lost if he's going to be mugging like a clown.
No, I disagree. I think at that point he was supposed to be mugging. The script was written for him to be mugging, and he was very good at mugging. I think he got very good at mugging.
I suppose. The movies were well constructed and they were well written, and that's what saved it. But, if he was in something, he couldn't make something funny if it wasn't well written.
I don't think you can compare him to anybody like Peter Graves or Robert De Niro or anybody else who would be placed into a movie as an alien in this particular genre. They're supposed to contrast. Even Al Pacino. I think Leslie Nielsen genuinely became a comedian.
Yeah, I think that made him a lot less funny.
So, Naked Gun movies, we know about those. I believe all 3 of them did work on Ruthless People, and that was a huge hit. Danny DeVito and Bette Midler.
It's quite good because it's not done in this style of Airplane
Yeah.
or even Top Secret. It's not a spoof or a parody. It doesn't have surreal Mad Magazine type gags. It's just a straight up farce.
A very good script. I know they just loved the script.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
It's really funny.
One of the Zuckers directed Ghost, which is pretty amazing. The huge
Yeah,
Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze movie. And they did, like you said, Top Secret, which was Val Kilmer's premiere. I'm not crazy about that movie myself.
I do like Top Secret.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. It didn't do so well because it wasn't exactly like Airplane. But it suffered from parodying two genres at once, World War II movies and Elvis movies, and trying to put that together. And again, it's like a hat on a hat. It's like two jokes in one. But it also, I think, suffered from the fact that neither one of those genres were particularly in the zeitgeist at the time. Americans hadn't seen any World War II movies or Elvis movies in a long time, whereas Airplane happened right at the point at which people were so tired of these disaster movies and these airport movies. It's still very funny. It's full of just amazing, great jokes.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't really do it for me. At this point, they're starting to not work as so much of a team, and they're splintering off. Hot Shots, they were rip off of Top Gun and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff's terrible. You have to look at Charlie Sheen's face, and you just don't
True.
want to have to do that.
I'm not a Charlie Sheen fan. Well, I remember seeing Hot Shots Part 2 and thinking that it was very, very funny, actually.
The other thing is, as we've talked about on our South Park episode, basketball with our friends Trey and Matt. They starred in that movie. They just starred in it. They were not really thrilled with how that came out. So they also did Scary Movies. They, of course, that started with the Wayans brothers, and but they took over 3 and 4. They were involved with Scary Movie 5. Pat Proft, other people that they were involved with too. They kind of were a little oriented towards them. That's why you see Leslie Nielsen in those movies. You see Charlie Sheen. You see some of the actors that they've worked with in those movies. They're not bad. 4 is particularly pretty good, actually. I thought 4 was pretty good.
You know LaShonda on 120th Street? Yeah. She told me that she heard a zombie going through her trash the other day. The next morning, she turned up missing.
What? Okay, back up. How the hell do you turn up missing?
Because nobody knows where you are when they realize you ain't there.
Guys, I'm trying to ask
Okay, whoa. So you telling me that you can appear and disappear at the same time?
No, man, you can't appear and disappear at the same time. The bitch ain't David Copperfield.
Guys.
No. But you can't be gone from one place and show up somewhere else entirely. So when you turn up, you're never missing. And when you're missing, you never turn up.
Unless you a zombie.
Again, now this is after watching just those horrible, like just completely unfunny, sketch comedy ones from the 70s. So it could be the contrast that made them more funny for me, but I thought they were all right. George Carlin's in like one of them.
All right, well maybe I'll.
Yeah. You'll see one of his last appearances. So that's their career. They're still kicking around. Obviously, they're still working. Let's get back to the movie and some of the controversial takes.
Oh boy, we might get run out of town on a rail before we even finish.
Can we talk about Jive?
No, he ain't gonna lay no more big rap up on you, man.
I say, hey, Sky. Subbers say I won't sing. Freddie J, I did the same old.
Hey, knock yourself a pro, Slick. The gray matter back, lot performers down, not take TCB in, man.
Do you want to
can
talk
we talk
in
Jive? Can
or-
we talk Jive?
No, we cannot talk Jive. I am not June Cleaver.
Oh, stewardess, I speak jive.
We were pretty comfortable with this joke in 1980. I would say that kind of joke had been kicking around. Is this a joke we should be bristling at this point? I think they actually put enough care into the manufacturing of these scenes with these guys.
Yeah.
And the reason there was a lot of care was that those guys wrote that stuff themselves. Al White and Norman Gibbs. They went to high school together. Those guys were buddies, and they got hired together. So they looked at the Zuckers brothers script and said, "No, this is not good. We can't say this. It's too stupid." They carefully wrote it. They took out books by linguists who had studied like the African American vernacular.
Really?
Yeah, they really did. They put that together very carefully. Yeah, and you can tell like they put a lot of thought into what they were doing there. And that's why it's so beautifully complex, and it's just so funny. They obviously had a really good ear for rhythm and how a sentence sounds really funny and all that stuff. Like, it's just brilliant. I think Zaz has a lot to thank them for because that's one of the best scenes. And it just works so beautifully. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I have to concede that I am a white guy. It is not up to me to say if that scene is still okay or not. If it's hurtful to someone, then I absolutely respect that. Write in, folks. Let us know.
Everybody's got their own opinions on this, so it's just you're going to run the gamut. The problem is just because America is America. We always have this very.
It's because
sticky,
America is America.
We always have this very sticky thing when it is a black and white thing, as opposed to. I mean, look at in the In-Laws.
But it's because of racism that joke could be hurtful. The joke where the indigenous Africans just automatically know how to play great basketball, that might be a little more questionable.
Actually that's what I was going to bring up. Yeah. So that's the other joke is, they end up in the Peace Corps or something like it, and they're in an African village, and he's teaching them sports, and he doesn't do anything, and everybody becomes instant expert basketball players.
A joke that I would not want to put my
I don't
name
think
on
anybody
today.
would make that now.
No,
it has not aged well. Kind of eye rolling. It's kind of an eye rolling stereotype kind of joke.
Yeah, black equals basketball.
Okay, suicide. There's a bunch of suicides in this. Can we do that still? Can we do those kind of jokes?
I don't know. That's a question. I don't know.
I don't think anybody would do those jokes now. I don't think they would. So we have 3 suicides in this movie.
All of them brought on by the hero of the film.
They're kind of hard. They're kind of hardcore.
Yeah.
So I thought that was sort of an interesting.
And 2 out of 3 of them could be considered racist as well.
Right, exactly. Elaine giving Otto, blowing him up, giving him basically a blowjob. Is that funny?
Yes.
Otto grabbing her breasts. Is that funny?
It's funny because he's just a piece of plastic. If he was a live man, it would not be funny. Mm-hmm. It's that he is a person. He is a character with very little control over his life and his environment. He is. He can't speak. He's just a plastic balloon. There's not a whole lot that he can do. So and
but
he's not
enjoying it. He's enjoying it. He shows a big smile.
He's not an aggressive.
She's being
threat,
asked to do an act
Yeah.
that she didn't particularly. She's doing it to save the lives of the passengers, right? She's doing this to save the lives of the passengers. And he's just enjoying it. I think it's a little bit offensive. I think it's still pretty funny. I think it's pretty funny.
But,
just like I think, David Letterman being a sexist jerk is funny because he's funny and he does it in a funny way. But that doesn't mean it's not offensive. Back then, these things weren't evened out. You didn't see men doing these kind of reciprocal kind of jokes. It was always women pleasing men. So then, of course, the last piece is, Joey, do you like movies about gladiators?
Joey, do you ever hang around a gymnasium?
Is that funny?
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? That's
Ever been in a Turkish prison?
Yes.
It's so funny. Again, but it's complicated, right? It's complicated. I think it's like Coco the clown in that it is showing him to be sinister, and it's a portrait of a sinister person, but
Agreed.
done in a funny way. So it's a portrait of a sinister person is just right under your nose, and which is often the case with these kind of pedophiles.
Right.
They're just your neighbor, your
position of respect and authority.
Yeah. Someone,
right?
Believe me, people I've learned in my life, that's happened. You're just like, you never would have suspected it. And that's the way it is. So it's portraying that aspect that just anybody, but it's the wording of those jokes. It is so funny.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, I don't think it's glorifying the pedophilia, just like I don't think Coco is glorifying the pedophilia unless you think those kids actually want to hear those stories.
I do think the kids want to hear those stories, which I don't think I don't think it's pedophilia. But in this case, yes, obviously Captain Over is portrayed as a pedophile and a groomer, but there's 2 things about it that mitigate it, and whereas you can laugh rather than cry, which is, 1, nothing happens to Joey. You're not laughing at anything happening to him. You're just laughing at this guy. The fact that he's got these tendencies. The other thing is that it's very plausible that this authority figure, this all-American hero-looking guy with the blue eyes and the lantern jaw, and he's this airline pilot, and he's this wonderful guy, that he would be a creep, a massive, disgusting creep, just under the surface. That is all too plausible and believable, and that helps it, because it makes it a joke that has a basis in truth. We all sort of suspect this about a lot of authority figures anyway, but also the fact that very shortly after that, you see Captain Over getting horribly sick and farting and drooling and going unconscious, and then you don't see him again for the rest of the movie. That helps it along a lot. Again, you never feel sorry. You never feel sorry for him because he's established himself as this clueless pedophile.
It's also the wording. It's the wording of, those are very clever lines. Those lines are very clever.
Right,
the Gladiator movie. I mean, that's just, you can't help laughing at how they put it, because it's just like the jive talk. Because so much care was put into the crafting of these jokes, it layers it up, brings it up a level. It's got, this quality to it. You can't help yourself from laughing just because it's so well crafted. It's very hard not to laugh at those jokes.
I also never noticed the relationship between the joke of him being a pedophile and the fact that then when we meet his wife later, she's incredibly horny. She's having an affair with a horse.
Sleeping with a horse.
And I love the nonchalant, you can let yourself out. There's juice in the fridge.
Yeah, they're both pretty messed up.
Yeah, and then she comes to the airport and she's grabbing Lloyd Bridges' chest and practically jumping all over him, and I realized, that's right, because her husband's into little boys.
Yeah.
That's why she's so incredibly horny. It's terrible, but true.
Yeah. So let me just wrap up this section of our conversation with, obviously, you could see the Elaine stuff touched a nerve with me because I'm female. And so those kinds of jokes are a little touchier to me. So all of these, if you had ever in your life had to deal with someone like Peter Graves, who was a real pedophile in your life, that's probably not going to be that funny to you. And just again, a lot of black people might not find those jive. So again, we just want to say there is a relativity to it that, you have to say, it's hard a little. Some of these jokes are kind of hard, and it's going to have to do with your own circumstances. All right, what else? Just as we wrap up, what else do you love in this movie? Tell me. I know you have some jokes that you're just dying to launch into.
But they've got instruments, and then you see them all in the cockpit playing musical instruments. And it's such a great surreal gag because it is exactly 90 frames long. 90 frames of film. That is about 3.5 seconds. That's it. And then it's gone. And it's so fast, you almost say, wait, did I just see that? And that's how you do a joke like that. That's how you do a joke like that. If it's going to be that completely crazy, you do it fast. And there's so many good jokes in this movie that are they're over so fast that they work. If they stuck around longer, they wouldn't work.
Yeah, the editing is great. And it's they understood, the comedic pacing, which you just don't see in a lot of other movies. I don't think we've talked nearly enough about the bar scene. The Girl Scouts fighting,
I love that because they keep coming back and back and back. And even at the very end of the sketch, when Ted and Elaine are slow dancing, the Girl Scouts are still fighting into the wee hours of the night.
While he's dancing, and then when he does the kicking out the legs thing, right? So they have him on a wire, obviously they have him on a wire, and he's kicking out. So apparently, that's funny enough. That's just so funny by itself. But apparently, one of the Zuckers said to him, hey, do you juggle? And he was like, yeah, bring it. And they literally just spontaneously tossed him a bunch of oranges or whatever it was. And he starts, thank God Robert Hayes knew how to juggle. Of course he did, because he's Robert Hayes. And he just starts juggling. I think that's one of the funniest things in the movie is him juggling while he's doing it. It's too funny.
I never noticed. There's a line I love where there's a guy talking on the phone and he's saying,
I know, but this guy doing the flying has no airline experience at all. He's a menace to himself and everything else in the air. Yes, birds too.
Which is a line directly out of 0 Hour. Mm-hmm. Directly out of 0 Hour. But in Airplane, it has the added line, yes, birds too.
Yes, I love that. I love it.
And again, if you watch 0 Hour, it's impossible not to laugh all the way through it because you start filling in those things yourself. But what I never realized until the last time I watched it was the next thing you see is the camera pans over and Lloyd Bridges is on the phone and replying
he's the
to
other
that
person.
guy.
Okay, he's a terrible risk, but what other choice have we got?
They're talking to each other 2 feet apart on the phone. I never noticed that before. But it's a great little added thing.
Here's a joke I kind of wanted to analyze. Why is this funny? And I can't quite put my finger on it. Leslie Nielsen coming in. I just want to tell you both, good luck, and we're all counting on you. And then coming back and doing it again. And then after they've landed, he does it again. And it's so funny.
He keeps doing it,
And I can't quite put my finger on why that's funny. And then what almost made my cut again as one of my top 5 jokes was just simply Kim congratulating him at the end.
Some of us here, particularly me, would like to buy you a drink and shake your hand. And Ted, I just want you to know that when the going got rough,
And just going on and on and on and talking after they've left, he's still continuing to talk.
loneliness, that's the bottom line. I was never happy as a child. Christmas, Ted, what does that mean to you? To me, it was a living hell.
And again, that's just like, that's obviously a classic joke, but it's just so good.
Ever been kicked in the head by an iron boot? Of course not. Nobody has.
Yeah.
You know what it's like to fall in the mud and get kicked in the head by an iron boot? Of course you don't. No one does. That never happens. Sorry, Ted, it's a dumb question. Skip that.
That's a beautiful detail. He's like, nobody has. Why did
Yeah.
I even ask that? And it's just like,
Stupid question.
like the stupid conversation you get into with someone at a party. You know, it's just so clever when they do something that doesn't even
Yeah.
quite make sense, like that little line about the boot. It's so funny.
Municipal bonds, Ted. I'm talking AA rating. The best investment in America.
Municipal bonds.
Yes, giving stock advice. Oh, it's
For
so.
some reason, I was remembering that wrong. I was remembering as they're coming in, as they're landing, and Robert Stack is barking orders into the microphone and saying, you know, keep your eye on the pressure, keep the tail up, look at the nose. And then once they land, he keeps barking the same, like, you know, like look at the pressure, keep the tail up, keep it, look at the gauges. But that joke doesn't happen at all. Is that in the sequel?
Yeah, I
maybe?
think it's in
Is
the
that-
sequel.
I don't
I
know.
think that's in the sequel. It's William Shatner doing that in the sequel.
Shift those turbochargers. Now check the sensors. Deploy your secondary boosters.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I saw it once. They finally get the girl who needs a heart transplant down to the ground, and they get her off the plane safely and into the ambulance, which immediately crashes.
But I think even funnier is Lorna Patterson just being like, "Thank you for riding with us. Have a nice day."
Right.
It's so funny.
Good night. So long. Thank you.
So let's wrap this up, and here's how I want to kind of wrap it up. Here's my closing statement on this thing. I did watch Airplane 2. I watched Airplane 2, and what they did for Airplane 2 is they matched it almost joke for joke. Like they literally, and the Zucker brothers, Zaz claims that they've never watched Airplane 2. Also, they've never watched it, but if they did, they would.
I think they're lying, just the way I was.
They would see that they lifted every single solitary joke. They just repeated every joke, maybe tweaked it a little bit, and added very few extra jokes. All the way to the point where, like in one scene, one of my favorite jokes in this movie is they're just like during the climax when he's needing to land the plane and they're deciding how dangerous it is. There's a vulture sitting on the back of his chair. It's just that's one of those very, very quick, just like few frames. In Airplane 2, what they do is they have the same scene, but with death with a scythe. And it's like, it's the exact same joke, except you've seen it, and the vulture was actually funnier because it was a little more authentic because, you know what I mean? Like, you could picture a vulture being in the air and being like, oh, this guy's about to die. I'm going to sit here and wait till he's dead. In a way, it's almost...
It was a live bird, and it was on screen for probably about, 1 or 2 seconds.
Right. So in the Airplane 2, it's death with a scythe. It's the exact same joke. And that's what the entire movie is joke after joke after joke. The Shirley jokes.
Technically, Dunn was under over and I was under Dunn.
Well, there's a lot more to the story, but you probably heard enough already.
Jimmy, you like it when Scraps holds onto your leg and rubs up and down?
Mr. Dunn and Mr. Unger were sucked out in airlock in the computer room.
Both together?
Mr. Dunn and Mr. Unger were sucked out in airlock in the computer room.
He took her best summer dress out of the closet and he put it on and went to...
My God, the sun.
What is it, Simon?
A large fiery ball at the center of our solar system, but that's not important now.
The continued misunderstanding of the question, what is it, is one of the most brilliant
It's
jokes
so
in the whole
brilliant.
movie. It's one of the best
It's so
gags,
brilliant. And it's because you really never heard that joke before you saw Airplane.
This woman has to be gotten to a hospital.
A hospital? What is it?
It's a big building with patients, but that's not important right now.
It's kind of like a Who's on First joke. A lot of these are classic kind of wordplay jokes that you've seen Abbott and Costello do. You've seen a million great, amazing comedians in the past do, but they did their own take on it, and it was totally original, and it was totally great. But so they
Yeah.
repeat that joke over and over in Airplane 2, and it's just like, we've heard it now a million times. And so anyway, the entire movie is that. So I thought what was interesting was that 0 Hour was the template for Airplane, and then Airplane 1 was the absolute template for Airplane 2. And I would love to, if I was an academic teaching about film, I think it would be really fun to have like a few classes where you examined what was not funny and what was funny about 0 Hour that they were able to lift and make funny. And then go on to Airplane 2 and talk about why these jokes that were trying so hard, that were the same template and the same construction as Airplane jokes, not just the ones that were repeated, but the ones that were novel. Why aren't they funny? Because there's so many jokes that just aren't funny. And it's interesting to think, why is that joke not funny and why is it funny in Airplane? And sometimes it's very hard to explain. But but it's apparent. It's apparent to everybody.
In conclusion, all I have to say is good luck. We're all counting on you.
Okay, so the way we wrap this show up is with the catchphrase. And the catchphrase for this week is, comedy is tragedy plus Tupperware.
It'll help you better prepare storing foods for the up-and-coming monsoon months.
That's a very dated reference. When we were kids, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another thing that was very ubiquitous, was Tupperware. And it was a very ubiquitous joke. Actually, that's a pretty bad joke because it was told so many times that by the time you saw it on an airplane, you were like, oh, that joke again, right? The only way that joke works is having Julie Haggerty tell it. It's also beautifully written, and that's why we love Airplane. That's why we love Airplane.
And comedy is tragedy plus a second cup of coffee.
All right, or that, or that, or that. Sorry for all the sweat, and we'll see you next time.
Well, I'll give him another 20 minutes. But that's it.